Salutations, my friends, and thank you for tuning into another one of the mini-casts that we're starting to do. I've titled this one Battling Bioaccumulation because we're going to be looking at the environment, the green agenda, the green ovation, the green innovation, things like GMOs, the environment, Fukushima, this pipeline that's built in Texas, fracking, Alec Baldwin talking to indigenous leaders about climate change, Monsanto clearly, and also how the fish are turning into intersex because of estrogen-like chemicals in the water. That is why the episode is titled Battling Bioaccumulation. We talk about this all the time on the show, on the podcast, on the page, and I've probably talked to this about you as well individually if you've asked questions about it. We are literally seeing them just flood us with chemicals. They are changing our natural rhythm, how our body operates. I did an entire episode, the distortion of the orientation, where we looked at just that concept and things kind of like the terraforming Earth series, where we looked at all these other things that are taking place. You know, the Dakota Access Pipeline spill, the Animas River spill, which I actually had the privilege to go see the other weekend whenever I was in Colorado, and you can still see the minerals. You can still see some of the discoloration of the water on the rocks. It's crazy. We're going to be talking about all these things and more in this edition. But before I do, as you guys are very well aware, we are in transition from shutting down season 4 and transitioning into season 5. Who would have thought this much work would have actually come from shutting things down? But there's a lot of different things that we're doing. I think what we're going to end up doing is taking off all of the video episodes from this season and leaving up the audio episodes on our audio podcast feed so you guys can go back and listen to them versus watching them. We've been dealing with censorship for some time now, and so what we're trying to do is kind of back things up on our own servers. But if you guys want to have access to the video episodes that we will be taking down, you guys can become a member of our Patreon exclusive, or you can purchase the entire season and previous seasons on our website, factionsoffreedom.gemdo.com. But with that being said, let's jump right into it. Now, I told you guys that this episode was titled Battling Bioaccumulation because today, July 14th, an article came out from Fukushima, about Fukushima and how they're planning to release radioactive material into the ocean. Now, this concept or this article, this story, really, it popped up a few months back, but apparently I didn't catch it on the feed. But because we're going to be talking about how these things affect us as a whole, I think it's good to get this on record. And the article is from the Drudge Report feed, and it goes, the local residents and environmental groups have condemned a plan to release radioactive tritium from the crippled Fukushima nuclear power plant into the Pacific Ocean. Officials of the Tokyo Electric Power Company, TEPCO, the operator of the plant, says tritium poses little risk to human health and is quickly diluted by the ocean. In an interview with local media, Takashi Kawamura, chairman of TEPCO, said, quote, "The decision has already been made," he added. However, the utility is waiting for approval from the Japanese government before going ahead with the plan and is seeking the understanding of local residents. The tritium is building up in the water that has been used to cool 3 reactors that suffered fuel meltdowns after cooling equipment was destroyed in the magnitude 9 earthquake and the tsunami that struck northeast Japan in March 2011. Now, before I continue, this is basically, if anything, what I want to kind of put a pin in. We have to understand that whenever they're talking about how this stuff builds up since 2011, and they are planning to release more radioactive material into the ocean, we have to realize how this stuff, it bioaccumulates. So every time there's an earthquake, every time there's a tsunami, every time there's a tornado or whatever rises from the ocean, that's whenever they're churning all of that radioactive tritium at the bottom. It's churning from the bottom coming up. So whenever we talk about how radioactive water and winds are coming from Japan, from the Pacific Ocean, and how it's actually reaching us here on the West Coast, that's a very real thing. How it's affecting the fish that are over in Seattle and Washington and California, how it is just destroying the wildlife. I mean, what did we have just the other month with the accident in Washington? You see, let me get back into this article. It says around 770,000 tons of highly radioactive water is being stored in 580 tanks at the site. Many of the contaminants can be filtered out, but the technology does not presently exist to remove tritium from water. This accident happened more than 6 years ago, and the authorities should have been able to devise a way to remove the tritium instead of simply announcing that they are going to dump it into the ocean, said Eileen Miyoko Smith, an anti-nuclear campaigner with the Kyoto-based Green Action Japan. They say it will be safe because the ocean is large, so it will be diluted. But that sets a precedent that can be copied, essentially permitting anyone to dump nuclear waste into our seas, she told the Telegraph. And that's what we actually talked about as well with things like the Animas River, how the EPA is not going to pay for the damages. And here in New Mexico as well, how they are dumping nucleotides, radioactive nucleotides, I think, yes, just radioactive material. They're just dumping it out into the desert. So what does that mean whenever we have that much regard for the Earth? Okay, so and I'll get into this as well. We'll talk about climate change and genetically modified foods and everything else as well. But fishermen who operate in waters off the planet say that any release of radioactive material will devastate an industry that is still struggling to recover from the initial disaster, the initial nuclear disaster. Quote, releasing tritium into the sea will create a new wave of unfounded rumors, making all efforts for naught, Kanji Takiya said, ahead of a local fishing cooperative. They told Kyoto News. So what I'm trying to illustrate by talking about this, look at how much damage is being caused simply by Fukushima back in 2011 that we're still having to deal with. That we are still having to deal with. This stuff, it sets in the earth. The sediment, it will leave an impression. That's why they're saying that we've entered a new age, a new geological epoch, so to speak, the Anthropocene, as they say, because of all the nuclear waste, all the chemical waste, all the wars, everything else that we're leaving, all these oil spills, speaking of which, I think one recently took place in Texas. All of these things are soaking into our earth right there from Countercurrent News. Texas pipeline just leaked 50,000 gallons of crude oil, while they recently cleared the Dakota Access Pipeline, even though that was spewing out about 8,000 gallons. And now we have the Sabal Trail pipeline in Florida that they're also trying to erect. This now Texas pipeline, the Longhorn pipeline, has now busted open, leaking about 50,000 gallons of crude oil. And this took place in Bastrop, Texas. I put this article up June 14th. That's today. And it's from Countercurrent News. It says a crude oil pipeline spill in Bastrop, Texas, Thursday morning released an estimated on 1,200 barrels of oil. That's over 50,000 gallons, prompting evacuations of residents close to the rupture. The Longhorn pipeline is owned and operated by the Magellan Midstream Partners and runs from Crane, Texas to Houston, according to Reuters. It transports up to 250,000 barrels a day and was under a routine maintenance when the spill occurred. Residents who live within a 2-mile radius of the leak have been advised to stay indoors, according to the Sheriff's Department and local emergency officials. Texas ABC affiliate KVUE ABC and the Washington Post both reported that the residents within 1.5 miles of the spill were asked to evacuate. No injuries have been reported, and Reuters reports that the Pipeline and Hazardous Materials Safety Administration has dispatched an inspector to the site. So yeah, thank you for looking at that at least. I didn't realize that it was that bad. You see, but what does that mean whenever we can have these types of oil spills take place? The day of inspection. What does that say besides these things don't need to get done? You see, it was like a few days or a few weeks after the Dakota Access Pipeline spill was or the Dakota Access Pipeline was granted. They had they had their own spill. You see, but there's a bigger issue or a bigger reason to all these things that I'm talking about. Fukushima is saying that, you know what, we're just going to drop radioactive tritium into the ground and see if we can try to help people out. If that doesn't sound like the work of an insane asylum patient, I don't know what to tell you is. But now we are learning that there is a study that finds long exposure to tiny amounts of Monsanto's Roundup damages the liver and the kidneys. This is, again, more of what I'm talking about by these harmful chemicals, these harmful materials bioaccumulating in us and negatively affecting us. Now, if you guys have been paying attention to a lot of the articles I wrote, and I'll put some of the links in the description below. I've been writing them for AWDs and for our website as well. I've really kind of been staying on Monsanto and Roundup and now Neil deGrasse Tyson and his whole food evolution, how they're really trying to push this genetically modified agenda. This stuff is crazy. But if there are studies, if there are recent studies coming out, it came out in 2015, recent studies that are coming out showing how we are being exposed to damaging materials and we are ingesting these things. What does that mean? Why are these people pushing it? Why is California now listing glyphosate as a cancer-causing agent? Why did the Netherlands ban Monsanto? You guys can read that article as well. I'll put it in the description underneath. But it says glyphosate, and this article is from Collective Evolution. I put it up July 7th, and it's by Alexa. It says that glyphosate continues to be the most used herbicide in the world, despite the fact that the World Health Organization's cancer agency, IARC, labeled it a probable human carcinogen in 2015. And evidence suggests GBH, like Roundup, poses particular health risks to the liver and kidneys in large doses. Small doses, however, hadn't been tested until a 2015 study came along. The study, published in the journal Environmental Health, found harmful effects in the liver and kidneys of rats exposed to low levels of Roundup in drinking water. The international group of scientists from the UK, Italy, and France involved in their findings studied the effects of prolonged exposure to small amounts of Roundup of the herbicide and glyphosate. And this is before I continue to get on into this, because I will. We've got to understand that this stuff that we're talking about when we're looking at Monsanto, when we're looking at glyphosate, when we're looking at how much damage this stuff is really causing, we have to understand that this isn't merely things that are going to show up in our generation. Like, these are things that are going to show up. These are epigenetic diseases. These are those things that, like I said, they bioaccumulate. They don't hurt us initially. They might have a smaller initial damage to us, but they will do more damage to the coming generations. I mean, this is why the glyphosate, Monsanto's glyphosate, Roundup, is turning weed killer. It's a weed killer that's turning Australian cane toads into monsters. They're turning these regular sized toads into huge muscly creatures. And it's crazy because when you look at some of the pictures, you know, there's a guy literally holding up a toad by its back with like his thumb and his middle finger, and that's the amount of meat on a single toad. And yeah, these are things that we haven't figured out yet. These are, as I said before, epigenetic diseases that are starting to show up. We don't know the effects because there's not studies going into it. And I'll say this before I get back into the actual article. You know, a lot of people like to say, "Oh, there's no studies to disprove what we're seeing. There's no studies to prove what you're claiming." Well, this kind of study right here proves it. But how many more studies are actually out there that disprove exactly what we're talking about? These same studies that are actually paid for by Monsanto, by Bayer, by these bigger companies. I mean, earlier this year, we actually heard how Monsanto hired an army of trolls to combat the sin. I've reported on that as well. These things that are in our food, that are now bioaccumulating into the earth, they are affecting us negatively. Okay, so that's why we're talking about battling bioaccumulation. Okay, let me get back into this article. It says, in the 2-year study, the scientists honed in on the influence of Monsanto's Roundup on gene expression in the kidneys and liver, adding tiny amounts of Roundup to the water that was given to the rats in doses much smaller than permitted in the U.S. drinking water. And ironically enough, this might sound crazy, but they actually found dozens of highly toxic substances in tap water all over America. And you know, this is why you hear me say, don't drink the fluoridated Kool-Aid. Don't drink all of that crazy stuff. Okay, so we'll get into that as well. The researchers noted that some of the rats had a 25% body loss presence of tumors over 25% body weight, hemorrhagic bleeding, or prostration. And while Monsanto had continued to claim its products are safe, it has kept quiet on the research calling out its dangers, including this 2015 study. Quote, there were more than 4,000 genes in the liver and kidneys of the rats that were fed Roundup, whose level of expression had changed, said the study's leading scientist, Michael Antonow, head of the Gene Expression and Therapy Group at King's College London. Quote, given even very low levels of exposure, Roundup can potentially result in organ damage when it comes to liver and kidney function, he added. The severity we don't know, but our data says there will be harm given enough time. Nicole Harriet, the Science and Regulatory Director at Beyond Pesticides, a Washington, D.C. based nonprofit organization, agreed, saying that it is important to take into account that the study, quote, used very low dose levels in drinking water. So, quote, in a country that uses a lot of glyphosate, this study should have some kind of public health influence. I most certainly agree. I definitely agree, because what we're literally talking about is how this, we hear this all the time, how the fluoride's messing with us. You know, the fluoride stare. You know, we have things like fluoride, atrazine, and now we have to worry about things like glyphosate. And I'm not saying all these things to scare you, to fearmonger, or to do any of that. What I'm doing by talking about these types of things is letting people know that we're very well aware of these issues, and when we're talking about them, we have to be hyper vigilant of what's actually taking place, of how they're actually trying to pacify the population, not let us get too uppity, so to speak, in their mind. They don't want us to have critical thoughts. They don't want us to have our own individual thoughts where we can have educated conversations about multiple issues. This is why we talk about the deliberate dumbing down of America. And this was an actual book put out by somebody in the educational industry, or in the educational administration, who was talking about this being the plan. They're trying to dumb us down. So when we talk about how there is an environmental nightmare and dozens of highly toxic substances have been found in tap water all over America, that's not a joke. Okay, and this is another article from Prepare for Change. I put it up July 12th. It's by Edward Morgan. It says, after reading this article, you would never look at tap water the same way again. I never do. Americans have generally assumed that the water coming out of our tap is perfectly safe, but the Flint water crisis and other similar incidents are starting to help people understand that there are some very dangerous substances in our water. In particular, I'm talking about things like arsenic, fluoride, lead, atrazine, percolate, perchlorate, and a whole host of pharmaceutical drugs. According to an absolutely stunning NRDC report, close to 77 million Americans received their water from systems, quote, that violated federal protections in 2015. And even if you get your water from a system that meets federal standards, that still does not mean it's safe. That's why regardless, you have got to filter your own water. Even if you get filtered water, you have to filter it, distill it, clear it. There's a lot of, why do we have to learn how to treat our water? Because we are looking at the effects of bioaccumulation, of big pharma over here being lobbyists, controlling our government. This is the after effects of whenever people create chemicals, create these band-aids on scar solutions, and we have to deal with the repercussions. Okay, so let me get back into this article. It says, let's start by talking about arsenic. Earlier today, I came across an article that talked about how levels of arsenic in the water at some schools in the San Joaquin Valley, quote, exceed the maximum federal safety levels by as much as 3 times. Wow. Three times. That is crazy. 3 times. There's enough arsenic in there that it's 3 times over. That's crazy. And they already mentioned the Flint water crisis. I mean, look at what the lead is doing to people. There's scabs and rashes being developed. People are losing hair. There's developmental disorders taking place. People aren't having proper nutrients. I mean, they're poisoning people. That's what I'm talking about by battling bioaccumulation. Okay, it says that Reef Sunset Unified School District Superintendent David East is worried about the water, as you should be. Not because of the drought, record rains this past winter ended 5 years of dry times. Rather, East, whose district encompasses the small towns of Avenal and Kettleman City on the San Joaquin Valley west side, is worried about the safety of the water that the 2,700 students in his school district are being given a drink. That's because arsenic levels in the drinking water are at some schools in the San Joaquin Valley exceed the federal safety minimum, or the maximum federal safety levels, by as much as 3 times, as we said before. And arsenic is not the only threat to school children. High levels of pesticides, nitrate, bacteria, and naturally occurring uranium also contaminate groundwater in many rural parts of the state. IARC, and this is the International Agency for Research in Cancer, says that arsenic is a Group 1 carcinogen, and if you get too much of it in your system, it can kill you. Sadly, the EPA has estimated that 36 million Americans are drinking tap water that contains dangerous levels of arsenic, as well as the dangerous chemical atrazine. And if you're unfamiliar as to what atrazine is, it's the chemical that is literally, as I said before, with the cane frogs, it is changing them. The stuff that we talk about, that bioaccumulates, how it changes your orientation, you know, the distortion of the orientation. Well, what else happens whenever you have fish turning gay, fish becoming intersex, males that are able to have children? You see, right here, as I said before, where we had weed killer turning Australia's cane toads into monsters. Look at this. And these are the byproducts of glyphosate. This is the byproduct of glyphosate. It should come as no surprise that the weed killer in question is glyphosate, a main ingredient in many herbicides, including the popular Roundup, and made by the most controversial chemical giant, Monsanto. According to the study published last week in the Proceedings of the Royal Society B, researchers from the Hungarian Academy of Sciences exposed the various species of tadpoles to glyphosate as a part of ongoing worldwide tests on amphibians whose environmentally induced deformities and illnesses make them hopping canaries in the coal mine on both land and in water. So let's take a step back. Let's see if we can find that clip about atrazine that I made for you guys, because you know this is an older clip, and you know people are always going to try to find a way to disprove it. But I wanted to put this stuff in here so we can get it all on the same record. And this is the article I put up June 29th. I'll put the link up there so you guys can go read it. Cancer-causing glyphosate labeled as scientists push food evolution. Right here, where we have atrazine, the chemical castration and the feminization, and how this stuff is literally being put into our water.
Our data so far suggests that the mixture of pesticides causes an increase in stress hormones, and those stress hormones cause immunosuppression, which leads to the inability to respond to any kind of disease pathogen.
Hayes is testing the effects of chemicals like atrazine, a common herbicide.
We have a whole family of animals where we've eliminated the female chromosome.
Specimen 01.
These animals that we know are genetic males have been exposed to atrazine for their entire life. And many of these genetic males now are turning into females. You can see he's got eggs that kind of look like they're in a sack. These are actually yolked eggs ready to be laid. What's happening is you're skewing sex ratios. You can get genetic bottlenecking, which can cause crashes. And quite frankly, if you're a genetic male, it'd be nice if you're developed as a genetic male. And now we have a chemical very common in the environment that's effectively sex reversing animals. I'm going to show you something pretty. Our data so far suggests that the mixture of pesticides.
I don't think that it's necessarily a good thing that people are becoming intersex due to the amount of chemicals that are being put in the water. As he said before, people the parameters on how they conducted this experiment is they introduced these frogs to atrazine their entire life. Their entire life they have been subjected to this chemical, and it's changing them. It's changing them. You have males that are producing males that are producing eggs. Like that. There's really not much else to say. This is transhumanism. You know, people are confused as to what atrazine is. I mean, that's one of those things I'm going to go tell you guys, go do your own research on. Okay, and I wanted to play that video for you guys so that I could change over here and talk about how male fish are turning intersex because of the estrogen-like chemicals in the water. Okay, and this is I'll play the video for you guys. You know, as you heard from Dr. Jim Hayes himself. But this article that I'm reading from is from True Activist. I put it up June 6th. It's by Brianna Acosta, and it says that male fish are turning intersex because of the estrogen-like chemicals in the water. Okay, it says that for over a decade, scientists have been studying the reproductive health of smallmouth bass in the Potomac River and a range of other rivers, like the Mississippi, Colorado, and the National Wildlife Refuge, to track the rise of the species. It wasn't until 2009 that the scientists began to notice something strange. An abundance of male fish that were sampled seemed to be carrying female germ cells or eggs in their testes. eggs in their testes, germ cells in your testes. Strange. It's a phenomenon that caused the scientists to deem these fish, quote, as intersex, because they exhibited physical traits of both males and females. Females also had egg production and release disrupted, which could lead to the decrease in the species population. So before I continue on, this is what I'm talking about. This is transhumanism. This is why, and I know I'll catch a lot of slack from saying this, but this is why we have a lot of people who feel as though they're homosexual since birth. What have they been given since before they were born? What were their parents injecting them with? And then what kind of chemicals did they give them? I mean, we're told that we're not supposed to have a whole lot of plastic material because of the chemicals in the plastics and how they mess you up as well. So if we have atrazine in the water, people in Flint are fighting lead. Now we have people in California that are fighting arsenic. Who knows what this atrazine is doing? That's why we have the feminization of so many different people right now. That's why betas are on the rise. You know, that's why they created, or not really created, but that's why they have the mindset of the beta now, the beta male, because the aggression, the testosterone, the aggression, all the anger, you know, the drive, these what would be considered male characteristics, they are being suppressed by these chemicals. This is the bioaccumulation. This is the distortion of the orientation. Okay, I'm going to talk about this and then we're going to move on to a few more things, but it says the findings for this intersex phenomenon range far and wide across North America, causing students to scratch their heads when it comes to naming any one source. While fish that were born near a sewage treatment plant exhibited these changes, so did ones from a wildlife refuge, and also ones in rural and urban areas. One that links the researchers point to is the casual relationship between those that nest near agricultural areas. Quote, we keep seeing a correlation with a percent of agriculture in the watershed where we conduct the study, said Vicky Blazer, a U.S. Geological Survey biologist who studies fish. Since the scientists know that these strange changes are caused by disruptions with the hormones, they started looking at what could be causing the disruptions for areas that rely on agriculture. They suspect that the estrogen that comes from cows through waste and is then turned into manure makes its way via heavy rains into nearby rivers. So still, we're talking about bioaccumulation, the chemicals that the hormone suppressors and the hormone changers, the endocrine changers that they put inside of actual cows, that they actually excrete from their body, turn into manure, that they put into the plants or put into the ground, that is then absorbed by the ground. That's all bioaccumulation, and then it transforms itself into rain, and then that rain is then carried over into the water that these fish or that these frogs are in, and it changes them. This, as I said again, we are still talking about the concept of battling bioaccumulation. That's crazy. It says too much estrogen can change the biology of the fish as they grow eggs, as they grow in their eggs, causing them to take on female characteristics. On one other relation to agriculture is the pesticide use that is prominent for such areas, with a slew of chemicals used to keep the bugs off. Pesticides are being sprayed into the air and inevitably land into the water, possibly poisoning so much that it affected the fish. So as Dr. Hayes said, putting these people, these fish, allowing them to stay submerged in atrazine their entire life. So what do you think all the fracking's doing? What do you think the oil's doing? What do you think the chemtrails are doing? You know, the aluminum, the barium, and the strontium, the lead, the arsenic, the atrazine. Like, how many more chemicals should I need? The glyphosate, the Roundup, like all these things, they do affect us. After a while, we do get hurt by everything that we see taking place here. And these are things that we are doing not only to ourselves, to humans, but this is something that we're also doing to the environment. Okay, and I wanna talk about one more thing before we go into talking about another one of the reasons as to why we started this episode. And this is again more of what I talk about in the distortion of the orientation, as well as what we see taking place in a larger scope, about how fracking waste contaminates the Pennsylvania watershed with radioactive materials and carcinogens. As I keep trying to reiterate, this stuff affects us. This stuff affects us. All right, whenever with the chemtrails, the vaccines, the fracking, the dumping, the Fukushimas, you name it, the Dakota Access Pipelines, you name it. This radioactive material, as we just talked about, this stuff affects us, or it at least affects the stuff around us that we are consuming. And I'll talk about veganism as well, but let me get into this article. It's from Sign of the Times. And today's date is July 14th. It says stream sediments in Pennsylvania downstream from 2 fracking wastewater treatment facilities were found to contain radioactive material and carcinogens, according to the study scientists from Penn State, Colorado State, and Dartmouth universities. The study findings, published Thursday, came after Penn State's Bill Burgos and his fellow scientists sought to discover what had been the effect of the strategy of treating and releasing fracking wastewater, according to the Independent. They sampled sediments and groundwater from the Conemaugh River water downstream from the 2 facilities that were created to make the water used in the fracking process fit for release into the environment. Isotopic ratios of 226 Ra and 228 Ra and 87 Sr and 86 Sr identified that peak concentrations of Ra and Sr were likely sourced from wastewaters that originated from the Marcellus Shale Formation, according to the study watershed scale impacts for surface water disposal of oil and gas water in western Pennsylvania. I'm going to say that study name one more time, just so you guys can go look at it, just in case you want to. But the study's name is Watershed Scale Impacts for Surface Water Disposal of Oil and Gas Wastewater in western Pennsylvania. Okay, their analysts detected peak concentrations of radium, chloride, barium, strontium, radium, and organic. I actually already said radium. They have it in here twice. Radium and organic compounds in the Conemaugh River watershed. The 2 major classes of organic contaminants include, and there's no way that I can say these chemicals, hydrocarbons, known carcinogens, and other things like that. When scientists examined steam sediments in Black Lick Creek, just downstream from one treatment plant, it was found to contain about 200 times the level of radium found upstream from the plant. The highest concentration of radium was just 14% below the level at which it would have been treated as radioactive waste in some U.S. states. Quote, despite several other sources, contaminants such as coal, bed methane, coal mine drainage, and flue gas desulfurization releases that can impact the surface water quality, we document multiple lines of evidence that indicate the legacy of unconventional oil and gas wastewater disposal has impacted stream sediments and pore water, which is groundwater, on a watershed scale, wrote Burgos in the study published in ACS's journal Environmental Science and Technology. So basically what we're talking about is how these chemicals, like barium and strontium, as I listed before, barium, strontium, chloride, radium, all these things are destroying the environment. We are messing fiercely with the environment. And you know who's got the stones to come out and say that climate change is a form of denial? Climate change denial is a form of mental illness. Alec Baldwin. But not even acknowledging any of these facts, any of these things that are taking place. Let's take a listen to this clip.
Perhaps the men from Long Island are a bit larger. There can be no successful climate agreement and no future for our planet without greater protection of the world's forests. Everyone in the room understands this. And so much of what's going on now is something that we have to treat as if it's a mental illness. I believe that climate change denial is a form of mental illness.
All over Mother Earth, those that are standing up for Mother Earth, indigenous people, are being murdered, are being assassinated.
Power to the father, say power to the daughters, power to the ver, ya verán, ya murieron.
So, while I won't say that climate change denial is a form of mental illness, because I feel like that's insanity, that's what you have people like Alec Baldwin coming out and saying, Bill Nye, the science guy, climate change being a form of mental illness, and they also want to try to lock up people who don't necessarily agree with climate change, and this is all of this agenda is something that they refuse to truly admit. They're not talking about the fracking. They're not talking about the Fukushima. They're not talking about the Monsanto. They're not talking about the Flint water crisis. They're not talking about atrazine. They're not talking about any of this stuff. They're just saying, and this is why you have the UN coming out, that they say they want other governments to take over water resources and allocations. They're not talking about the real issues. They're talking about fake solutions. And this is how these people operate. They want to try to provide solutions to the problems that they've created. So yeah, this is why they have people like Alec Baldwin coming out talking about climate change. Leonardo DiCaprio also coming out talking about climate change in his private jet, flying all over the place, wasting God knows how much money. Talking about climate change, saying that we have denial because we're saying, well, what you call climate change, this climate action that you're talking about, this is stuff that affects us. Whenever you have people like Monsanto, Bayer, and whoever else dumping chemicals into our drinking water, and you guys not talking to us about it, yeah, that's climate change. That affects us. That's real climate action. That's you guys destroying the planet and us having to actually figure out ways to fight it. Us having to figure out ways to combat what these people are doing, combat our destruction, battle this bioaccumulation, all of this stuff. It truly does affect us. And ironically enough, the very same day that all this stuff is taking place, that we decided to do this video, we heard about how Moby is opening a vegan restaurant with all proceeds going to charity. Now, I've had some people already say, you know, don't trust him. He supported Hillary Clinton. I understand. I really do get that. But what we have to look at is how these things are taking place. We're seeing a shift. We're seeing people want to actually take care of their health because they have things like GMOs, they have things like Roundup, they have things like these carcinogenic chemicals, glyphosate, these things that cause cancer. They want to be able to take their health into their own hands and not play victim. They don't want to be another number and another byproduct to what these evil people are up to. You see.
Moby, now better known for his veganism, his food expertise. The veteran musician has a vegan restaurant here in Silver Lake. It's called Little Pine. And the most amazing thing about it is all the profits will be going to animal welfare organizations.
Welcome. This opened in November, right?
Opened in November.
How's it going so far?
It's stressful.
Yeah.
It's time-consuming. It's expensive. It's panic attack-inducing. But ultimately really good. Like, I mean, and I feel a little weird, like, because I mean, clearly I'm self-interested in saying, like, it's a beautiful space and the food is great. It's like, why would you believe me?
Right.
Like, it's my restaurant. Of course I'm going to say.
But you must have gotten all this advice from people who've opened restaurants, and they say it's not as easy as you think it is, and it's so much work and stressful and all those things you talked about.
I had a little vegetarian tea shop in New York. Teeny, that I owned with an ex-girlfriend, and I learned so many...
for his music.
Well, I'm not over here opening up tea restaurants and vegan restaurants and things of this nature. But whenever we talk about vegans, whenever we talk about these people trying to take their health into their own hands, that has become a revolutionary act. The same way I tell people that if you pray, if you meditate, this is a revolutionary political act. People can't tell you what you can and cannot do with yourself. The minute that they do is the minute that they have become authoritarian. Whenever we can't take into consideration our own health, how we want to be considered healthy, our diet, what we ingest, that's whenever we have truly reached a point beyond any measure. So whenever we have people that are fighting for food rights, for animal rights, for the environment and things of these natures, that's real climate action. That's people who are actually taking time to do something about the real dangers that we're seeing, raising awareness about the effects of GMOs, about these cancer-causing agents that are everywhere. So while I myself may not be over here opening up a vegan restaurant like Moby, I'm sorry I don't have the finances to take care of that, but I'm very well aware of the issues that GMOs face. I'm very well aware of things like Monsanto and how they're also teaming up with Bayer now, a pharmaceutical giant. What is this? What is going on with our food? Why do we have to battle this bioaccumulation? How are these things affecting us, and how do they affect our kids for the generations to come? There are thousands of questions to be asked, and simply saying that climate change deniers are mentally ill, that is intellectually dishonest. That is what a mental midget does. We have got to look at all the facts of everything that's going on. We are being slowly killed through Monsanto's, depopulation, dehumanization campaign. They want us dumbed down, pacified, and non-combatant. They don't want a threat to the things that they see taking place. So whenever you do take your health very serious, that hits them in the pockets. That makes them change what they're having to do. This is why you see veganism taking the route that it's taking. This is why you see vegetarians getting the light that they're getting. This is why you see climate activists, you know, the water protectors at the Dakota Access Pipeline, how that popped up so frequently. I mean, we've all seen that video with the fracking, with the man in the boat in the fracked river where he lights a match and the whole river just starts to burn. These are things that are affecting us, guys. If there are studies being conducted that show Monsanto's Roundup damages our livers and kidneys, these things are real. Atrazine is doing chemical castration on the males and feminizing us. We have got to look at what all of this stuff means for us. As I said before, I'll put some of the links of the articles that I've written to kind of follow what I would consider all of this bioaccumulation, the battling of the bioaccumulation, the distortion of the orientation. I'll put the links to the articles that I've written for AWD News in the description bar below, so you guys can go read about it. How we have people like Neil deGrasse Tyson pushing Monsanto and their food evolution. How the Netherlands actually banned Monsanto's glyphosate from their country because they don't want that in their food. We have an entire war going on for your health and your mental, physical, and emotional stability. And if we don't take it serious, guys, these people will. They don't want to empower you. I am simply here trying to empower you to raise awareness about all these issues that we have to face. If we blindly give these people more and more of our money, time, and attention, they will seek to destroy us. We have got to be smarter. We cannot be the sheeps and let these people lead us to the slaughter. However, that's all I really have for you guys. If you have any questions, feel free to leave me an email. I have it in the description bar below as well. Or leave us a voicemail at 843-900-6296. And like I said, guys, we are in the process of switching from Season 4 to Season 5, so make sure you're downloading all the episodes that you can. And if you missed that, you know, we will put it up there on the store so you guys can buy all the previous seasons as well as the last season that was up. But yeah, that's what I have for you guys. Become a Patreon exclusive member if you like what you're seeing. Donate to our operation. This is Noisera, Freedom Faction, out.